One of the experiences I trust every homebrewer shares is the feeling of awe that comes from witnessing the conversion of wort into beer through the fermentation process. Even after 15 years, I still get giddy when I see the first signs of airlock activity, a nice fluffy krausen developing on top of my beer. The worst is when this takes too long. You all know the anxiety that comes from checking on a batch a day after pitching and seeing no action. This is why we love Imperial Yeast, who pack 200 billion cells of the purest yeast into each pitch-right pouch, which assures quick starts, healthy fermentation, and predictably great results. I strongly urge all of our listeners to check out everything Imperial Yeast has to offer and let them know that you appreciate their support of the Brülosophy Podcast while you're at it. All right, on to the show. During the mashing process, enzymes naturally occur that break long-chain starches down into sugars that can be fermented by yeast. Sometimes this process either doesn't work as planned, leading to a stuck fermentation, or it's just not enough, as is the case with one of the newest beer styles on the block, Brut IPA. You're listening to the Brülosophy Podcast. I'm your host, Marshall Schott, and joining me today is contributor Brian Hall to talk about the use of enzymes in brewing.
Yeah, we got a good one for you today. Like always, we are on top of all these new styles, and Brut IPA is the hottest thing out there, second only to New England IPA.
So hot.
So today we're going to break it down, if you will, and talk a little bit about enzymes, what they do in the mash, what they can do for you in your fermenter, and how they can help you dry out your beer.
Yeah, well, and this is, when I first learned about enzymes, or like external enzymes being used in the brewing process, all of the talk, just a few years ago, up until about a few years ago, seemed to be about people who weren't getting the attenuation that they expected. So something happened either with their mash temp, or maybe they used too much adjunct in their grist. And so they would add these enzymes to drive that attenuation. That's something I've never experienced, and I'm not bragging or anything. But in the hundreds of batches that I've brewed over the last 14 years, I've honestly only had one stuck fermentation. It was this porter that I made and fermented it in the brew kettle. I'm not sure what caused it to stick. Now I did ferment it with a yeast known for being kind of fickle. I've kind of figured that's what it was, but I didn't hit it with enzyme or anything. And I've yet to brew a Brut IPA, so I can honestly say that what I know about this topic is purely based on what I've read in research articles and online. I have no firsthand experience with enzymes.
I played around with them a little bit. We'll talk a little bit later about the experiment that I did. There are a couple different options out there for ways you can dry out your beer, and a couple different other ways to think about using these enzymes to help with stuck fermentations, which is currently something I'm actually battling right now, that readers will get to read in a couple months as we progress with that. Yeah.
Well, I'm looking forward to getting into this topic. It's something that I am definitely interested in, particularly with the rise of Brut IPA. Hey, at least based on the stats that I see, I know that we've got quite a few new listeners over the last couple of months, and I just want to let every single one of you know that we would love to get you involved as a participant in our experiments. If you live in Anchorage, Alaska, Chicago, Illinois, Denver, Colorado, Auburn, New York, Atlanta, Georgia, or Fresno, California, you can shoot me an email, marshall@brülosophy.com, and I will connect you with the contributor who lives closest to you. Just yesterday, I was contacted by a listener who lives right here in Fresno, and had no clue I was so close to him, so we're going to be meeting up soon. Thanks to everyone who's been using the links found at brülosophy.com/support to do their online shopping, as well as all of our badass patrons who receive killer rewards in return for their support. Those pledging just $3 a month get to sit down with someone rad every single month and lob questions at them. Coming up in just a couple of weeks is Pilsner brewer extraordinaire Annie Johnson, who's also Pico Brew's master brewer. We recently had Russian River's Vinny Chilurzo, Dr. Charlie Bamforth, and many other great people on, the videos of which are made available to all new patrons. Those pledging at the $5 a month level not only get a unique discount to Yakima Valley hops every month, which this month, by the way, was $5 off 1 pound bags of South African hops, those really popular ones that people couldn't get their hands on a while back. So just buying 1 pound of those hops pays for your support of us right there. It's a pretty good deal. But also, people at the $5 level are entered into a drawing every single month to win a $50 gift certificate to Love to Brew, one of the coolest homebrew shops around. So you can learn more about becoming becoming a patron at patreon.com/Brülosophy. We got some listener feedback this week, which is brought to you by Brewers Hardware, who I'm telling you, if you haven't checked these dudes out yet, do yourself a favor and head over to brewershardware.com. They offer one of the widest arrays of stainless brewing products I've seen online. Some really unique items like the quick clean take apart ball valve, as well as systems for those who are into the more professional feel of brewing. They recently came out with the BH15 pilot brewing system, a turnkey 3-vessel setup that utilizes a hard plumbed manifold, eliminating the need for hosing changes. And this thing has it all. Just go check it out for yourself if you want to learn more. It is really sweet. If you're in the market for a turnkey rig, go check them out right now as well, because they're doing free shipping on all pilot brewing systems. So you can head over to brewershardware.com to learn more about those and everything else that they offer. And when you check out, make sure you mention Brülosophy so that you receive a free gift. That's brewershardware.com. Okay, Steve Frank wrote in from Frederick, Maryland with a really neat tip I just wanted to share with everyone. He said that he listened to our Q&A episode, I'm not sure which one, and wanted to address a method to close transfer sugar solution into the keg. So this was in response to reducing oxygen ingress when you are bottle conditioning. And so how do you get that? Somebody had asked something about how you get the priming sugar solution into the keg without opening the top to, and when you do that, it's going to bring oxygen in with it. So he says this can also be used for close transfer of flavoring with tinctures, gelatin, and such. You need an empty plastic bottle, preferably an old seltzer water bottle, so there's no flavor in it, a carbonation cap. Now, these only come in ball lock as far as as far as I know. I've never been able to find one for Pinlock, but a carbonation cap that can fit both gas and liquid disconnects, and a liquid to liquid transfer line. So beer line with liquid disconnects on both ends. You fill the bottle with the sugar solution gently. Once all of the sugar solution is in the bottle, give the bottle a squeeze to push all of the air out, and then tighten the carb cap down. There should be no air in the bottle. He then says to connect the CO2 to the bottle and fill it with CO2. Well, you got to be careful when you do that. You don't want to explode a plastic bottle in your hand. Once the bottle is at pressure, disconnect the CO2 and connect the bottle to the keg via the liquid-to-liquid line transfer. Note that if you are particularly anal about oxygen exposure, before you connect the liquid-to-liquid line transfer line, you can purge the line by bleeding CO2 through the line from your pressurized keg. Next, turn the bottle upside down and depressurize the keg, which allows the contents of the bottle to transfer into the keg. Repeat the process of filling and pressurizing the bottle with CO2. Connect the bottle to the keg via the liquid-to-liquid line transfer line. Invert the bottle and transfer until all of the contents in the bottle are in the keg. You can squeeze the bottle too if you're careful about not to create negative pressure and suck air back into the keg, though that should be a low risk. For the truly anal, borderline compulsive people, they can purge the keg again with CO2 at the end of the transfer. Choose your level of insanity wisely. Sometimes homebrewers honestly shock me with their ingenuity. This is such a simple idea that completely, I think, provides a solution for this issue of transferring whatever it is, whether it's priming solution or, like he said, flavor tinctures or whatnot, into your keg in a non-O2 way.
Yeah, I have done something similar for other types of brewing applications, not for this one in particular. But yeah, the carb cap with the plastic bottle has always been a favorite of mine in the brewery. I
don't know how in 14 years of brewing I've never heard of that trick.
Yeah, it's a pretty cool one. And if you really want to take that a step further, you can also use that. You can also use that bottle for pulling beer out of your keg into it and doing small blends and carbonating those. And that's how I've found ways of entering beers into competitions without ending up with 5 gallons of milkshake coconut stout with jalapenos sort of things, but yeah, there's a lot. The carb cap is really an awesome tool. I think this is an awesome way to get sugar in, and it makes me cry a little inside because I wish there was a way that you could make that opening just a little bit bigger and push hops in that way.
No joke. I know. Well, I for those of us, or for those out there who like me use Pinlock kegs, all you have to do is buy the ball lock carb cap and then one ball lock disconnect, right? Because that's all you're connecting. And then on the other end of that transfer line, you just put your regular old Pinlock connection. It should work just fine.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Works great.
Dude, Steve, that is awesome feedback. I appreciate you writing in to share with our listeners that really clever idea that I should have heard about a long time ago. If you have feedback for the show, you can send it to feedback@brulosophy.com or leave us a voice message by calling 951-444-0320. All right. So every single year, and I'm not sure how long this has been going on. I know that I picked up my first Sam Adams Long Shot 6-pack. God, this must have been over 10 years ago now. But Sam Adams holds their long shot homebrew competition where the winners get the opportunity to have their beer brewed by Sam Adams and then sold in a mix pack. It's a pretty rad honor to win this competition and have your beer drunk by folks everywhere. Well, our great friend Eric Pierce entered a Saison and ended up being a 2018 long shot winner, which is amazing. How freaking cool is that? I was lucky enough to have him send me a bottle of the beer that he submitted from the actual batch that won the competition, and I figured he could use some more quality feedback.
1 minute beer review with Jersey and Tim.
We're not gonna taste it. No, we're not gonna taste it anymore. All right, let's taste it.
Oh, it smells good.
Whoa.
Ooh.
It's got scotch flavor, like a scotch oaky scotch.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah.
Oaky Scottish.
Might have just poured a scotch in there.
A little bit like gingerish.
Yeah.
Or a spice.
Oh, yeah, dude, look at you. Stuck it.
Nailed it.
It's dank, earthy and dank. Probably brewed with peat.
Who the hell's Pete?
I got an idea.
Dry, but it's good.
Yeah, it's good.
Couldn't tell you what it is.
Scotchy, mossy, earthy, danky, spicy
Yeah.
beer.
We're good.
Dude, that's it.
Don't forget about Pete.
Let's call it a Scotch ale. That's what it is, dude. We stuck it. It tastes good and I could drink all of it. Let's drink all of it.
Yeah. All right.
Well, I got a little bit of apricot in the finish. We stuck it and nailed it. I give it like 6 jerseys.
Yeah, I'll go 6 or 7.
Yeah, there you go.
Why not?
A total of 15. Yeah.
I'm not a huge Saison drinker myself, but I definitely appreciate a good example of the style, and I completely understand how Eric's won the competition. It was so good, crisp, crushable. I didn't get oaky or anything like that, but I can sort of see how the guys might pick up on that, the slight phenolic character that you get from a typical Saison. To me, in this one, it was not overpowering. That kind of drives me away from Saison.
Congratulations, Eric. That's totally awesome. I'd love to comment on the oak levels, but you didn't send me a bottle. So I'll just say that's totally great. You're living the dream, man. That's great.
Yeah. Well, I'm super excited for Eric. Congratulations, dude. I know you're listening to this, and we're really proud of you, and I cannot wait to see his mug plastered all over Sam Adams bottles. That's going to be hilarious. So I'll definitely be picking up the latest 6-pack of the Sam Adams Long Shot beers. If you want to have your beer or any other fermented beverage you make reviewed by a couple of dudes at my house, you can email me, Marshall@Brülosophy.com, and we will get you all set up. All right, we'll be right back. After a long brew day, the last thing I want to do is waste more time chilling wort. I've tried so many different options, and ultimately I settled on the super efficient immersion chillers made by Jaded Brewing. With the King Cobra and Hydra, I'm able to chill my entire batch of wort from boiling to just a few degrees above groundwater temperature in as little as 6 minutes. If an immersion chiller is right for your brewery, then do yourself a favor and check out all of the rad options Jaded Brewing has to offer at jadedbrewing.com, and be sure to let them know Brülosophy sent you.
Hi, I'm Stephen Leach, creator of Brow Supply Brewing Systems, here to tell you about our latest Unibrow brewing system. Modeled after the brew in a bag method, the Unibrow uses the same kettle for both mashing and boiling, replacing the fabric bag with a stainless basket that can hold up to 20 pounds of grain. A heating element is run by an electric controller that allows for the maintenance of specific mash temperatures and makes mashing easier than ever. Each Unibrow is shipped with a counterflow chiller and the parts required to brew a batch of beer. We're really proud of the Unibrow, and we know you'll love it as much as we do. Go check it out at browsupply.com and sign up for our email list to receive special deals in your inbox.
Family-owned Atlantic Brew Supply is the largest homebrew shop in the Southeast. No gimmicks, no multinational corporate overlords, and no BS. They offer exclusive malts, yeast, and more from local artisans, as well as award-winning recipe kits. They also sell professional brewing gear and cask equipment from sister companies ABS Commercial and Cask Supply. Most ingredients are available by the ounce, plus Atlantic Brew Supply has an on-site calculator to help you craft your best brew. Orders are processed same day, and 2-day shipping is guaranteed for East Coast customers. Get 15% off your first order using promo code BREWPOD. That's BRUPOD at AtlanticBrewSupply.com. As every brewer knows, the best beer requires the best hops, which Yakima Valley Hops provides fresh from the source to brewers around the world, carrying everything from classics like Cascade to modern favorites like Galaxy and Mosaic, as well as other ingredients and gear. Yakima Valley Hops has it all. And don't forget to check out their new podcast, The Late Edition, where the YVH crew goes into depth on our favorite plant with industry experts. Head over to YakimaValleyHops.com now to see all they have to offer and subscribe to The Late Edition wherever it is you listen to podcasts. Enzymes. Without them, beer wouldn't really be possible. There's actually a lot in life that wouldn't be possible without enzymes. Before we talk about the kind that we add externally during the brewing process, let's go over the really general stuff that naturally occurs when making beer. First off, I guess, what exactly are enzymes? I did a little poking around to get a really simple definition of this, and really all they are proteins made up of chains of amino acids that do all sorts of neat stuff, from bonding smaller molecules together to breaking larger molecules apart. And this all depends on the shape of that enzyme. Yeah,
enzymes pretty much, they control the rate at which chemical reactions occur, and they act on pretty much any substance, including beer.
Yeah, which is, thankfully, they act on beer. Well, we wouldn't have beer if it weren't for them acting on it. So now, a couple of disclaimers. Neither Brian or I, and I don't mean to speak for you, Brian, are, experts on enzymes. We've done a lot of research. We've been brewing a lot, and we've done a lot of reading about that. But, if we say anything wrong, be sure to let us know. We want to make sure to correct that. But at the same time, we can't go too much into depth on this stuff because we would just be here all day long. And I imagine that the show would get pretty dry. So we're going to try to stick with the enzymes most important to the brewing process. And I highly recommend, for those of you out there who are really interested in this stuff, there's this really great resource called Wikipedia. You can find a ton on there. You can do some Googling as well. Yeah. From what I know, based on my experience with brewing and all of the research that I've done on this crazy hobby, the most commonly discussed enzymes in beer are amylase enzymes.
Yeah. So we've got a whole bunch of different rests we talk about throughout the brewing process. Usually when we're talking about malts that have not been quite as well modified as they currently are now. And during each of these rests, the reason that we stop at certain temperatures is because there is an enzyme at play, and it is breaking down longer proteins and longer starches into things that the yeast eventually can use for fermentation.
Right.
So, we've got the proteolytic enzymes, we've got beta glucanases, and then, the ones that we're most interested in, at least at this point with our well-modified malts, is alpha amylase and beta amylase.
Right. And we discussed a little bit. We've done some shows on step mashing or different mash temperatures. Go check those out. We discussed some enzyme stuff there. The focus of this show primarily is going to be on the enzymes that are at play in your typical single infusion mash. And like you said, Brian, those are your alpha amylase and your beta amylase. And just to kind of break those down a little bit, no pun intended. Good Lord. Alpha amylase enzymes break down larger complex starches, converting them to a soluble fermentable sugar. They tend to be more active at warmer temperatures. I read somewhere that 70 degrees Celsius or 158 degrees Fahrenheit is kind of their sweet spot, though, they're going to be active anywhere from about 149 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 65 C, upwards of about 165 degrees Fahrenheit, which is, 73, 74 degrees C. What those are going to do, the alpha amylase enzymes, when those are at play, you're typically going to produce a less fermentable wort. So warmer mash temperatures correlate with less fermentable wort.
Right. So we've got all these grains. They're packed full of starches, and starches are essentially just long chains of glucose molecules. But because of the bonds in those starches, they're not easily fermentable by our yeast. So we can have our enzymes work at these different temperatures and produce maltose, glucose, dextrins, those sorts of things.
Right.
And so the alpha amylase essentially liquefies these starches, making them ready for further enzymatic activity. And yeah, you really end up with a much less fermentable wort than if you were to do it a little bit lower, which is where beta amylase acts. And that breaks down the starch and the dextrins into glucose, maltose, and maltotriose. And my disclaimer for this episode is I don't usually talk about this stuff much at parties, so my pronunciation may be horrific. And you can give me as much shit as you want about it, but it's not going to change it.
I'll do that annoying thing where I correct you, and my corrections will probably still be inaccurate. So
that's fine.
We'll just roll with it. But yeah, so beta amylase, those rest temperatures are anywhere from, I believe I read it's like you can go as low as about 139 degrees Fahrenheit, which is about 62 degrees Celsius. And it's active upwards of about 154 degrees Fahrenheit.
149 is what I read.
149 is kind of the sweet spot for beta amylase is what I've read as well. But what a lot of people I know are doing nowadays, and I've kind of been doing this as well, is just hitting 153 to 154 degrees Fahrenheit, which is about 67 degrees Celsius or so. And just kind of having that, you're kind of favoring both the good parts of both beta and alpha amylase. And so you can produce these really nice, predictably fermentable worts that you're hitting your FGs where you want them to be. So now, one thing I think we need to talk about is this idea of denaturing. So you've got beta amylase, which is favors that cooler. I mean, we say cooler; it's not much cooler, but the cooler side of the mash temperature rest. And then you got alpha amylase, which can go, is going to be active upwards of about 165 degrees Fahrenheit. My understanding about denaturing, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Brian, is that basically it is a function of warmth of the environment that those enzymes are in becoming too warm. And then once that happens, it essentially renders that enzyme useless, regardless of whether you cool the mash back down or not.
As far as I understand it, that is correct. So once you have denatured, and we'll talk about that when we talk about using additional enzymes in the mash, is that we could just say right now, that is one of the advantages of using additional enzymes in the mash, is that once you have raised that temperature to, say, boiling, you have completely denatured all of those enzymes. And so when you go to put your wort post-chilling into the fermenter, you don't have to worry about any of those enzymes continuing to work. Yeah. Essentially, I guess another way to think of it is you're killing them off.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and that's how people talk about it, is you're killing them off. The reason I bring that up, though, in this discussion about beta and alpha amylase is that there's this idea kind of floating around out there, and it has been for a long time, that let's say you mash in and you are, you're aiming for 152 degrees Fahrenheit. And then, you mash in and you're, oh no, you're at 164 degrees Fahrenheit. Well, then you go and you run inside, and 5 minutes go by and you come back with a bucket full of ice. And then you add all that ice in to get it down to 152. I'm not so sure that it's going to do anything by doing that. We've done some experiments on overnight mashing where you've lost a ton of heat and it didn't seem to have much of an impact. That kind of seems to confirm this idea.
Yeah, I can't say I've missed many mash temperatures lately, and nor have I tried doing it side by side with one that I haven't missed. But I can say I've noticed that as well.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing to think about. And one of the things, an older brewing friend of mine who's really not much into it nowadays, but even back in the day, what he told me like 6-7 years ago is, hey, just roll with it. If you hit it and you mash in and you're at 160 degrees and you're aiming for 150, good luck trying to get the character out of the beer, by backing it down to 150. It's probably not going to work. So just roll with 160 and call it what it is, So
right, but then you've also got the option maybe for using enzymes a little bit later.
And that is exactly what we're going to talk about right now. So, there are all these other enzymes. We kind of talked about it earlier that can happen because of the mash temperature, because of the temperature of the mash as you're kind of climbing up to that single infusion rest. But through the awesomeness of science, brewers can now purchase various enzymes to add at certain points in the brewing process to help them achieve certain goals. Again, it's similar to what we were talking about with mashing. Those naturally occurring enzymes that are the most commonly discussed, amylase enzyme, is also available for purchase in powder form.
Right. And so going back to what you were just saying to that youngster that runs in at 160, 165 degrees and then has to bring it back down quickly, this is one option for him, is to just, boom, hit it with some more amylase enzyme right into the mash. So there's one of the options for that is Amylo 300. I believe that's made by BSG. and that can enhance, because you only have an hour for the enzymes to work in the mash. Having more enzymes in there can help to get that conversion to happen quicker.
So my understanding about Amylo 300, which is the same stuff as White Lab's Ultra Firm, it's the enzyme that's there is, it's called, let's see if I can do this, amyloglucosidase, which my understanding of what this stuff does, I can read off what BSG says about Amylo 300, but I'm not sure it's going to make much sense. In essence, what it does is it increases the amount of glucose in the solution, which is a simple sugar, and it makes it more present in the wort, thereby making it more fermentable to a point that couldn't be accomplished without using that enzyme. And my understanding is that amyloglucosidase is actually a little bit different than just straight up amylase enzyme. Like you said, amylase enzyme can get added to the mash to kind of, replicate. It acts as an analog to the naturally occurring amylase enzyme that maybe you denatured by mashing in too warm, and so it can help you to achieve what you were hoping to by making the mistake of mashing in too warm. Amyloglucosidase has the ability to degrade starch polymers and maltose to glucose for the production of high alcohol and low carbohydrate beers. So it's doing something a little bit different than just the straight amylase, unless I'm wrong about that.
No, the straight amylase just breaks the 1,4 linkages, whereas the amyloglucosidase does break the 1,4 linkage and the 1,6 linkage. And there's diagrams online that actually, if you do look at them, it does make sense, but it breaks them down in different spots. So essentially, the way that one of my other brewing buddies likes to describe it to me and other people is, it goes up to the starches and goes choppy in two different places, versus the amyloglucosidase breaks it down and goes choppy. Or sorry, the amylase chops it in one spot, and the amyloglucosidase chops it in two different spots.
Now we just need like a picture book to go with that choppy.
I always think of the tree debranching from How to Brew and John Palmer.
Right. That's actually what came to mind.
Yeah. So I think of this as, we've got more branches being cut, and then we've got a couple things we're going to talk about here in a moment that are more like shredders.
Well, so we've got this kind of small distinction between just straight amylase enzyme and you're saying glucosidase enzyme, which is again Amylo 300 or ultra firm. But then perhaps the most commonly talked about enzyme that I was aware of that you could add after the fact, so not necessarily naturally occurring in the mash or in beer in general, is, it's alpha galactosidase enzyme, which is also known as
Beano.
Which, for those out there who have never heard of Beano, is used for human gas relief, but it also is used by brewers to fix, as far as I know, the only thing that it was really used for was to fix stuck fermentations.
Right. Yeah. There's lots of threads online going back saying, I put Beano in my beer, I put Beano in my beer, I put Beano in my beer. And, the first time I read that, I thought, that'll make you fart less the next day. So that's awesome. But no, alpha galactosidase is able to break those. We talked about the 1,4 and the 1,6 linkages. So this one breaks the 1,6 linkages. You've got the amylase that breaks the 1,4. You've got the galactosidase that breaks the 1,6, and the glucosidase that breaks down both the 1,4 and the 1,6.
So Amylo 300 is like a blend of both of these, or is it is Beano the one that kind of is like the blend of both and just does the shredding?
Amylo can do both the 1,4 and the 1,6, the Amylo 300, as I read online, can do both the 1,4 and the 1,6.
Whereas the Beano is only hitting...
Beano just does the 1,6. So
that's so interesting. And I honestly don't know. Again, I have no experience using these, but it makes me wonder if the way that Beano has been used, in the fermenter generally, right? Because you've got this stuck fermentation. So in essence, fermentation is done, and the brewer's just not happy with where the FG was at. And so they toss in some Beano to drive that attenuation further down. Whereas Amylo 300, I know that there's been some talk about being able to use that in the mash. Amylase enzyme obviously gets used in the mash as well.
Right. Beano does not get used in the mash and won't convert a whole mash due to the lack of the 1,4 breakage or the hydrolysis.
Its ability to hydrolyze the...
That's what I'm trying to say.
So many big words. We haven't even had a beer yet today. At least I haven't. And we're sitting here struggling talking about this stuff.
Yeah, I'm not going to comment on that, but let's keep going.
Oh, yeah.
So those are our options, for them. So if you're looking to do something in the mash, you're looking at using something like the AMLO 300 or the Ultra Firm from White Labs. And then there's also, what is the one there? You can buy a fungal alpha amylase product as well that can work. That's currently one that I'm messing around with a little bit because I got it from a local brewery here.
Yeah, I've seen online when I was just kind of poking around for different types of I'm going to refer to them as adjunct enzymes, things that you add to the beer. They don't just occur naturally. There was the ones that I saw commonly actually were like you can get them on Amazon. Was it just amylase enzyme? Is that the fungal stuff that you're talking about? So it's alpha based, or
it is alpha based? Yes, that's correct.
So it's not a beta. Is there a product out there like a beta amylase enzyme? I guess
there is a beta amylase. I don't know if there's a beta amylase product. The sort I made a note here that it's obviously indigenous in the barley kernel and the wheat kernel, but I don't have a note as to where you can purchase a beta amylase.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, there was one more enzyme that you had that you wanted to chat about as well.
So they're the product that I played around with that actually didn't end up in the experiment due to a failed keg. Was a product called SebaMil. And SebaMil contains both glucoamylase and amyloglucosidase. And it produces large amounts of glucose by being able to break down both of those 1,4 and 1,6 linkages. It's used a lot in the brewing industry to reduce dextrins. It's used for like low carbohydrate beer and that sort of thing. It's also used in the distilling world, where you don't want to have any residual body. You're trying to get as much alcohol production as possible. SebaMil itself can convert a whole mash. It's also used in gluten-free brewing. And the experiment where I tried doing all three, and we were going to do, multiple different taste tests. Mm-hmm. We were able to establish the final gravity prior to kegging it in this crappy keg. And it was the only one of the two that I tried between that and the Beano that did bring the beer down to a straight 1.0.
Oh, wow. And so this is SebaMil, and this is the stuff that you got from a local pro brewery. You said, who is that person using it for Brut IPA or?
Actually, I got it from a buddy of mine, and he's using it for making drier beers and the like.
Huh. So interesting. I've not played around with any of these things. I guess so as kind of a novice when it comes to these adjunct enzymes, the way my brain works, I'm kind of trying to organize it in a really simple kind of reductionistic way. And my way of thinking about it is this, and again, correct me if I'm wrong. You've got enzymes in general. The purpose of those in brewing being to increase potential attenuation.
Right. I mean, the basic function is to convert starches into sugars.
Well, an amylase enzyme is, while it's doing the converting, what it's doing is making, you've got, again, these beta and alpha that have different levels of fermentability, but it sounds like with the other enzymes that we've discussed, what they're essentially doing is without adding glucose, they are increasing the level of glucose, which subsequently makes the wort naturally more fermentable.
Yep, they're doing more conversions, correct.
Yeah, God, this chemistry stuff, I don't think I would have gotten A+ in college, but it's so interesting now from a brewing perspective,
Yeah, it makes me wish I would have paid a little more attention when I was doing my chemistry courses.
God, I was lucky enough to be in chemistry with the woman who is now my wife, and I appreciate that she sat next to me in every class. We'll just keep it at that. But so one of the commonly discussed things when it comes to enzymes, and this I've got a little anecdote to go along with this, is when to add the enzyme. Now, Brian, you mentioned, and this is something I hadn't actually thought about before, that Beano, so that's the alpha galactosidase, that never gets added to the mash, and that's because it wouldn't do anything, or is it just because of a function of the whole? You were talking about it breaking the 1,6 linkage.
Yeah, so it won't do the 1,4 linkage.
And that only occurs in the mash.
I don't honestly know enough to say that that's the only thing that's going on in the mash.
Well, this is where experimentation comes into play, because now I'm curious to see if you were to add Beano in the mash and maybe do the beer next to it just have no Beano used in it at all, if the Beano being in the mash would actually have an impact on attenuation.
Right.
That'd be interesting.
Both alpha and beta amylase are breaking the 1,4 linkage. So I'm not sure so Beano can't convert a mash in the standard sense.
Right.
I'm not sure what it would do if you added it in addition to the enzymes that are already present in the mash.
Yeah.
That's beyond my know-how at this point.
Right. Well, I've gotten into conversations with people who are talking about, and all of this, it seems like a lot of talk about enzymes have stemmed from the whole Brut IPA movement, which, for better or for worse, we're learning new stuff. And I think that's pretty cool. But again, whether you should add these enzymes that you're buying, from BSG or from your homebrew shop into the mash or into the fermenter is kind of a big issue. Some of the concerns that I would have by adding it to the fermenter, of course, would be oxidation. But we learned from our friend Steve that you can use a really cool, rig up your own little O2 oxygen-free way of transferring it in there. The other thing would be contamination because you are adding something extra to the fermented beer. But other than that, I guess it just kind of boils down to what works better.
Well, and you're thinking about adding it later on. You can just add it right at yeast pitch. There's no reason that you need to wait, partway through fermentation for adding these enzymes. You can add them right when they pitch. They're not going to go away unless you crank up your fermenter too high. You're not going to denature them. They'll just be present and they'll start working.
Right. It's funny how my conception of how to use enzyme is fully based on my old school idea that you only use it for a stuck fermentation.
Yeah. And I mean, if that's your goal, you can add it right out of the gate. And, it doesn't, people, and as far as dosage goes, because that's a question that everybody asks, is there's usually a recommended dose, but, you could add a single individual enzyme, and eventually it would, if you give it enough time, it would work its way through the whole beer and do all of its work. But you might want to add a little bit more than that. There's no harm in going overkill, because once they've done their work, they're done.
Right. Well, you know what? I think the whole talk about enzymes and its use in beer is going to open up a lot of really neat discoveries for what we can do with beer and drying them out. Now, you and Malcolm have done some experiments focused on using enzymes in beer, the results of which we're going to get to when we return from this short break. Have you ever thought about adding a port to your kettle but held off because you didn't feel like drilling into your gear or sending it off to have someone else do it? From the makers of the super fast counterflow chiller, the exGEERimator, comes the Hangover, the easiest way to add extra ports to your kettle as well as countless other options. Mount a faucet to your keg for easy portable pouring. Set up the perfect whirlpool arm. Hold a heating element in place. All of this and so much more without permanently modifying your gear. Manufactured right here in the United States, the Hangover offers brewers too many convenient solutions to list here. So head over to exGEERimator.com today to see what the Hangover can do for you.
Compact and simple to use with a small footprint for brewing indoors, the Grainfather makes it easy for you to brew professional quality beers at home. The Grainfather is an all-in-one brewing system that lets you brew all grain beer in a single compact stainless steel unit. It uses an electric heating element and pump to maintain a constant temperature and to circulate the wort during the mashing and cooling stages. It also comes with a counterflow chiller to reduce chilling times and produce high-quality wort. And now, with the addition of their conical fermenter, the Grainfather takes things one step further by offering homebrewers state-of-the-art temperature-controlled fermentation just like commercial breweries use. And with the Grainfather Recipe Creator and Connect app, you can easily design a recipe, sync your brewing system with your phone, and then just sit back and relax as the app takes over and assures that you maintain your scheduled mash temps and boil schedule. Head to Grainfather.com to purchase your all-in-one brewing system today and to sign up for their free Recipe Creator tool. Once more, head on over to Grainfather.com, that's Grainfather.com, and get started today.
Shopping for brewing supplies online can be a real hassle, which is why we recommend Love to Brew. They've got great prices, super fast shipping, and they carry exclusive products like East Coast Yeast, the Brewers Essentials brand, and their award-winning beer recipe kits. They're also the only place you can pick up your very own Brülosophy recipe kit. The numbers don't lie. Love to Brew has hundreds of 5-star reviews, and thousands of brewers are choosing them for their supplies and ingredients each year. Experience the difference at lovetobrew.com. That's love, the number 2, brew.com. When dumping wort-soaked grain and leftover low-gravity wort while cleaning up after a brew day, did you ever wonder what your true efficiency would be if that wort made its way to the kettle instead? Using the brew bag, a fabric filter for all mash tuns and brewing methods, allows you to capture every last drop of wort. Not only does this increase kettle efficiency, it lowers your grain bill, which saves you money. Throwing wort in the trash is like dumping a 12-pack down the drain and just doesn't make sense. Use the brew bag and leave no wort behind. I've been using these filters for a long time and recommend them to everyone. I never have to worry about a stuck sparge and cleanup is fast and easy. Go grab yourself a brew bag fabric filter at brewinabag.com and be sure to use code TBP17 at checkout to get a discount on your order. Like I said earlier, I've never actually added enzyme to a beer, but with the growing popularity of Brut IPA, it's becoming a pretty popular ingredient to find on the shelves in both commercial and home breweries. One of the easiest to acquire enzymes found on store shelves everywhere is alpha-galactosidase, also known as Beano, which, Brian, you put to the test recently.
Yeah, I decided to make a liked beer because it was a beer that was going to be featured in an upcoming competition. And one of the features of a liked beer is having it being crisp and dry. And since I was starting with such a low original gravity, I decided to figure out a way to dry it out. So I actually made 2 5.5 gallon batches of beer mashed at 157, so a touch on the high side for what I probably would have normally done.
So that's going to favor that alpha amylase then up in the 157 degree range. That's 69 degrees Celsius.
Yep. So I remember having this conversation with the rest of the crew, and they all decided, let's try and get this beer as not fermentable as possible, despite me wanting to have this crisp, wonderful beer. And so
it was your fault for not picking Brut IPA, right? I mean, that of course you messed up, and we're going to throw all of this garbage data out because you didn't go with a Brut IPA for this.
So I mashed it 157, combined the wort. I actually made 15 gallons of this. As we mentioned earlier, there was a keg failure. It was supposed to be a 3-way, but it ended up just being 2. So there was going to be a 7 beer that I'll talk about as we go throughout this experiment. So it was a pretty standard hour-long boil, chilled, split between 3 carboys. The original gravity was 1037. Crushed up just like you would any drug, 10 capsules of Beano to a nice powder between 2 spoons, added them straight in at yeast pitch, left the other one alone, and then we added 5 milliliters of Subamil, I believe is what it was, to the Fallen Soldier carboy. Pitched with Imperial Yeast L13 Global, fermented it, I believe it was 50 degrees, and then ramped it up slowly.
That's 10 degrees Celsius. I'll be sure to add that.
The final gravity was 1007 for the no Beano beer. The Beano beer got down to 1003, and this was after. I mean, I had them warm for almost a week because I wanted to make sure that any fermentation, anything that was gonna get munched on, got munched. The 7 beer, even though it didn't really make it to packaging, or it did make it to packaging, but it failed in packaging. The 7 beer did end up with a FG of about 1.000 or slightly below.
So now, so it did sort of what we were talking about earlier, apparently, right? Is that it broke down more of these starches apparently and converted those into, or broke them down into glucose, I should say. And the yeast was able to chomp on that stuff more than in the Beano beer. So that would indicate to me on some level then, just anecdote, because we didn't do, anything too experimental with this, that the 7 which you said that again, that is kind of a blend of both of these types of enzymes, right?
Yes, that has both glucoamylase and amyloglucosidase.
So, but that
now you got me saying it. Amyloglucosidase.
Glucosidase. That sort of suggests then that these 1,4 linkages are still present in the wort post mash then, or post boil. That's again a little beyond my pay grade. It could be that, or it could just be that 7 was, it's got more of the enzyme in it, and maybe because I've read anecdotes of people online saying that they put Beano in and it drove it down below 1. Yeah, I've read that too.
I don't know exactly what it could be.
So, well, our first observation here though is that when you add Beano, or when you added Beano, you got 4 points lower finishing specific gravity than when you didn't add Beano. So it did the job on that level. I guess the question then is do beers taste any different?
Right. So we served it to 21 people. 12 people would have had to answer correctly. Would have had to have been able to identify the odd beer out. However, only 7 were able to do so.
Exactly 1/3.
We've seen this. I forget the name of the experiment, but I've done another one where there was almost a full point in the 2 beers, and then people were unable to tell them apart. So, no surprise there. No surprise that my wonderful palate wasn't able to tell them apart either.
So what? I don't have this in my notes, but I'm curious what the ABV difference is between the 2 beers. I would have to, I guess. Let's see. Your 1037 to 1007 is gonna be compared to 1003 is gonna be what, 0.5%.
I was just about to say. I think it's about 0.5%. Yeah, you got point. It's 0.004 difference. So yeah, you're about 0.5% different.
So it's not okay. So it's not a huge difference, but you'd still think. I think there's a lot of people out there who would think that you'd be able to, perceive on some level, whether that's aroma, flavor, mouthfeel, whatever, perceive a difference. But what this is showing is that despite those differences in FG and ABV, people just could not tell these beers apart with any, reliability, with any consistency. I mean, 7 out of 21 is exactly 1/3, which means that's exactly what we'd expect if people were just random guessing.
Yeah. So, I mean, like I said, a previous experiment we've had, it was a full, a percentage point difference in alcohol, and people didn't pick up on that. So yeah, I mean, when you're looking for 0.5%, that's pretty tough. Sometimes I can't tell the difference between 9 and 4%. So.
Oh man, you need some training then, Brian.
At least that's what I tell my wife.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyhow, so the Beano didn't produce a super perceptively drier beer. But it might be good for other styles where there might be a higher finishing gravity, because 1007 is not really a particularly high finishing gravity. So if you've got an England IPA, if you've got an IPA that might be normally finishing around 1010 or 1011, and you're able to add enough enzyme to drop it down to 1. I would think that people would be able to pick up on that.
Well, this is a really, when you shared these results, I have to admit I was taken aback quite a bit. Prior to me doing the mash temperature experimentation and tasting those beers multiple times side by side, and despite the 1+% ABV difference between them, not being able to tell them apart, I kind of bought into the same idea that a higher FG produced a sweeter beer. So I mentioned earlier about a porter that I made that had a stuck fermentation, and people were recommending that I add some Beano to it, but I didn't do it. I didn't need to. And of course, if you go back and read that article, it's something called like Ultimate Single Vessel Brewing or something silly like that. My perception of the beer, my description of it is that it's a little bit sweeter than it should be, and this. But now I'm starting to question whether that just wasn't kind of me falling in line with expectation, or with what I would think the beer should taste like given the higher FG. 1024, I think, is what it finished at. Maybe it was a little bit more sweeter, but what we seem to be learning here is that whatever is left behind after fermentation is complete, whatever long chain dextrins weren't fermented out by the yeast, don't necessarily seem to have a real strong flavor component to them.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that. I mean, a lot of the, even just some of the Brut IPAs that I've been tasting, people have been giving me cans to try and whatnot. If you hadn't told me it was a Brut IPA, I wouldn't even be thinking, oh, this is kind of dry. So, I think expectations play into taste far more than anybody really thinks about when they're trying beer, and when you're reading labels and all sorts of things. I mean, that is certainly setting you up for how you're going to taste.
Yeah. I mean, and I'm not going to name names or anything like that, but I was perusing a forum recently. I think it was actually Facebook, and somebody had posted a picture of their, hydrometer, their final gravity hydrometer reading, and said, this was supposed to finish at 1012, but it's at 1018. And of course, the first 3 things are, man, that's going to be so sweet. You're probably not, you're going to have issues with it. You can add Beano to it. You can do all of this. And I'm sitting there going, I really don't think it would be that much sweeter. And I'll tell you what, the pushback we got after sharing, objective results without our opinions in them, saying, dude, these beers aren't perceptibly different, even though the FGs are 8 points or 10 points apart, whatever it's been. People don't like to hear that. I mean, people are convinced that they would have been able to taste it. I just think it's fascinating. And this, your experiment here seems to kind of support that same idea. But again, you royally screwed up by not making a Brut IPA. And so thankfully, Malcolm came to the rescue.
We can throw the whole thing out.
Let's see
So
what
awesome Malcolm can do.
So a few months ago, when Brut IPA was actually starting to gain some traction, my buddy at Full Circle Brewing, and I kind of mentioned this earlier. So Full Circle's it's actually an old brewing company here in Fresno that was recently bought out by some people who made it way better. So kudos to them for doing that. And they've jumped on to brewing kind of trendy styles of beer. They've got their milkshakes, their New England hazy IPAs. And they were Brad, my good friend down there, who's the head brewer. He was brewing up a Brut IPA and was having issues getting the FG that he wanted. And so he got some information from the folks. I think he was using Amylo 300. And when he reached out to them and explained the way he was using it, he was told, and he was adding it, to the fermenter at pitch. He was told that he shouldn't be doing that he should be using it in the mash. And so we all kind of started talking about this, and Malcolm decided to put this one to the test.
So Malcolm made 2 5-gallon batches of Brut IPA, identical side by side. Everything was the same, with the exception of the timing on the Amylo 300, which is the amyloglucosidase enzyme. So he used it in the mash for one, and he used it in a post-chill in the fermenter for the second. So following 60-minute mash rests and 60-minute boils, the worts were at the same 1053 OG. And I think it's important to point out that he did that Amylo 300 is an enzyme that works best. I believe it's around the mid 130s, I want to say, as far as temperature goes. And so he did do a rest and added the enzyme in and allowed it to work at that rest, because Amylo 300 does denature once you get above 148 degrees.
That's interesting.
So he put it in. He did put it in earlier for those of you out there that are thinking, it denatures. So he did everything else identical for both beers. He did the 60-minute rest, 60-minute boils. The worts were at the same 1053 original gravity. In the vessels, he added the same amount of White Labs 090 San Diego super yeast. And at this point, the batch that hadn't received any enzyme in the mash now had the same amount of Amylo 300 added to the fermenter. So he added both the yeast and the Amylo 300 at the same time. So now we've got both beers sitting, fermenting for 10 days. And then at the end of 10 days, the hydrometer measurements were taken. They showed that the batch that had the enzyme added in the mash had a final gravity of 1007, whereas the batch with the enzyme added in the fermenter finished at 1002. Dun, dun, dun.
Dun, 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 which goes against the recommendation that Brad received from, I believe it was BSG. I'm not totally certain who it came from, who said that it should be used in the mash if you really want to drive attenuation. What this is showing is that adding it to the fermenter actually had a stronger effect.
Yeah, so I wonder what I wonder how he phrased the question, because for someone that's looking for a more efficient mash but maybe not wanting a brute effect, adding it into the mash might be a safer option than adding it to the fermenter. I mean, if you were to approach me and say, "Hey, I just want a little more attenuation in my beer, but I'm trying to make a solid IPA or a porter or an XYZ," I'd probably recommend you to put it in the mash. But if you're trying to make a brewed IPA and make this thing as dry as my sense of humor, you might want to add something. Sorry. Yeah, if you want to make something really dry, then you'd want to put it in the fermenter where you can let it sit at an optimal temperature where it can go and chomp branches for 10 days or longer.
Well, and he did. I mean, I know for a fact that Brad was asking specifically about brewed IPA because he was struggling to get his brewed IPA.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. As dry as possible. Right. So,
Yes. Well, for those of you out there that are just trying for a more efficient mash or, not wanting to make a brewed IPA, those are my comments. So so Malcolm took these beers, he cold crashed, he fined them with gelatin, he kegged them up, carbonated them, and served them to blind participants.
And I think a very interesting observation is when these beers were ready, that the one with the enzyme added in the mash was ever so slightly hazier. And this was a permanent thing. It never went away, Malcolm told me. It was ever so slightly hazier than the one with the enzyme added into the fermenter, which made me wonder, what could be going on in the mash that would cause that. If there wasn't some sort of interaction with the proteins, the natural proteins from the grain during the mash, or something else like that. I don't know if you have any ideas about that, Brian.
Boy, I got no idea. I mean, other than if you're clear of beer, maybe there's more stuff in solution that's clinging together with the findings that's dropping out. But my knowledge of that is none.
I know. Yeah. I just thought it was interesting. Now, these beers weren't, for those who haven't seen this article or the photos, it's not like it was hazy. It was clear by all respects. It just wasn't bright like the one with the enzyme added in the fermenter. I don't know if I did read somewhere that these enzymes can be used, and it's usually in the fermenter as a clarification tool. So I think that's kind of interesting, and perhaps the Amylo 300 being added to the beer or at yeast pitch did have some sort of an effect on clarity as well. So Malcolm went and served these beers to 24 participants who had no idea what was going on between them. At that sample size, he would need 14 people to correctly identify the unique sample in a triangle test in order for us to say that it was significant. And in the end, a whopping 18 people out of 24, that's crazy, were able to identify the odd beer out. To me, that's a pretty strong indicator that these beers were perceptibly different on some level.
I just think it simply goes to show that Malcolm can't make two batches identical.
Oh, great. Hey, he's not here. We can talk as much shit on him as we want.
As long as we're going to give me shit about the leg beer. No, I mean, that's a pretty strong indicator, but it's surprising to me just simply looking back at the liked beer. The difference there was 4 points, and now we've got a difference of 5 points.
Right.
And suddenly everybody can tell the difference. We've had a difference of a full 10 points, and people haven't been able to tell the difference. So
it's crazy.
It kind of throws me for a whirl as to what's going on.
Yeah. Well, and my big question is, and we just can't answer this. I think it would take some crazy lab equipment to be able to really answer this, but what is responsible for that difference in whether it's flavor or mouthfeel or aroma? In terms of preference, people always want to know this. 7 of the 18 people liked the batch with the enzyme added to the mash. 8 people liked the other batch. 2 people had no preference despite noticing a difference, and 1 person just reported perceiving no difference. They guessed, luckily. But when it comes to Malcolm's impressions, this is where I was a little bit, again, just kind of surprised with what he perceived as being different between these beers. Because in my mind, if I read this without reading what caused it, I'd kind of presume that it was a mouthfeel thing. I would think that, okay, this beer that finished at 10:02 is just thinner, crisper, lighter, more noticeably so than the one that finished at 10:07. But Malcolm, in addition to being able to consistently pick the odd beer out of, he did 3 consecutive triangle tests and stopped because it was so easy for him. He said that he perceived the beer made with the enzyme added to the mash as being more malty. So that's a flavor thing, probably aroma as well. Like the Vienna malt came through more intensely, he said, while the beer with the enzyme added in the fermenter tasted less sweet and lacked the bread crust character he noticed in the other version. So depending on what it is you like, you can use that to kind of determine maybe where you want to add this particular type of enzyme. I suppose if you're making Brut IPA. Interestingly, his preference was for the one with the enzyme added to the fermenter because he perceived it as being more dry, right? If it doesn't have that malt character, if it tastes less toasty or bready, you're gonna have more of that dry impression, I would think.
Right, and if you're making an IPA, or particularly a Brut IPA, you're looking for that dryness. That's probably what he wanted it to taste like, is what I'm guessing.
Exactly. That's my guess as well. There's also the possibility that his awareness of everything that was going on maybe biased his impression as well as his preference. But the fact that his ability to distinguish these beers kind of aligns pretty strongly with the blind taster data, I think is pretty fascinating, and makes me wonder about what this particular significant experiment might imply.
Right, and the surprising thing to me is that the recommendation was to add it in the mash, that you would end up with a drier beer adding this enzyme to the mash. Even not looking at at his results doesn't really seem to make as much sense because you're not letting the enzyme work for as long. But it was interesting that it seemed to make a more fermentable wort in the fermenter.
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, at the very least, I think this idea seems to support this notion that the point at which enzymes are added has an impact not only on fermentability, but on the perceptible characters of beer, which is really freaking interesting to me. Makes me wonder how it might play out with different styles, because in your Beano experiment, well, not only in different styles but with different types of enzymes. If we were to compare maybe Beano and Amylo 300, would there be a difference between those if they were both used in the fermenter? It's just all kinds of really interesting things we can kind of glean from this.
Yeah. So I guess coming full circle and thinking about the use of enzymes in beer, what are some recommendations we can make, if any, and then just think about some pros and cons as to using enzymes. I think obviously a pro would be you can end up with more alcohol, less carbohydrates if that's your sort of thing. You can end up with a drier beer. But what sort of cons can What sort of cons come to mind when you think of using enzymes, if any?
I think to me, this is one of those situations where the pros can also be a con. There's this idea that FG has, it's kind of correlated with mouthfeel and body and whatnot. I haven't been able to replicate that or prove that in any way whatsoever with the experimentation that I've done. But, I guess one potential concern would be that you drive that attenuation so low that you create kind of this thin, watery type of beer. Again, maybe that's not possible, but that would be a concern. I think there really are more pros to the use of enzymes for people who are looking for that specific level of attenuation than there are cons, but maybe you have some ideas.
No, I mean, I was just kind of lobbing it out there. I mean, other than dryness and the carbohydrate alcohol thing I mentioned. I mean, the only thing is for those people that are out there that are bottling, if you're bottling a beer that has active enzymes in it, keep into consideration that as those bottles carbonate, the enzyme can still be working, especially if you're letting them sit for 2 weeks and we don't want to have any explosions of any kind. Yeah. Or if you're keg conditioning or whatever it is. I'm not sure how many people are still bottle conditioning, but I know there's a few out there. I don't know if you'd be bottle conditioning a Brut IPA, but it is something to be aware of. Yeah, I agree. A lot more exploration for us to do. I would say that the experiments that we discussed in this episode were focused not only on different usages of these enzymes, but also the different types of enzymes. So we've got a lot more comparing to do, a lot more experimentation to do. One thing I'll comment on is just Brut IPA as a style. Up until a couple weeks ago, I hadn't really had one that I enjoyed any more than a standard West Coast IPA. But that all changed when, after our collaboration experiment brew day with Imperial Yeast Casey Hellwig, I took her to a local brewery called Riley's Brewing, where I'd never been, surprisingly. Their brewer, Mike Samaya, a friend of mine, he had a really nice example of a Brut IPA on tap that had this kind of champagne-like, bubbly, carbonation level to it that was really delectable. I loved it, but just this pungent hop character, and it was so crisp and easy drinking. I have to admit, it sort of changed my opinion about this style to the point that I ordered 2 pints of this stuff. I think it was right around 6.8, 6.9% alcohol. And then no kidding, right after we left Riley's, I took her over to House of Pendragon, kind of our last stop on our trip here to Fresno, who also just happened to have a new Brut IPA on tap. And it was fantastic. Again, crisp, dry, nicely carbonated. I know that both of those guys are using enzyme. I'm not exactly sure where they're using it in their process, and I'm not even sure what type of enzyme they're using, but it really did seem to do the trick. Now, again, that could be a function of my own bias, knowing that these were Brut IPAs I was drinking. I do question whether you could make a good quality, dry Brut IPA without the enzyme. I think maybe if you were to mash it something like 146 degrees Fahrenheit, which I don't know the Celsius for, but you probably could drive that attenuation pretty low, down around the 1005, 1007 range. Right. We've done a little experimenting with overnight mashing. If that's a danger you're willing to risk, you could let it overnight mash at a low temperature and, you could end up with a drier beer that way. And I also think that carbonation is one way that you can really change the mouthfeel of a beer.
Absolutely.
So it's harder to do in the keg, because at a certain point you need either 100 feet of line or some other, or restrictor faucet or other sorts of things. But we've taken me and my buddy Christoph Vinno, who's a enzyme and biochemistry master, who helped me out a lot getting some stuff together for this podcast. We did you're gonna love this, a champagne conditioned New England IPA. Where we took a New England IPA, which normally I'm serving around 2 volumes, and we conditioned it up to about 6 or 6.5, and it definitely really changes the perception of dryness of the beer. When you're trying the two. It was fun to try them side by side and whatnot. So
yeah, there's no doubt about the fact that carbonation has an impact on the perceptible impression of dryness. I don't think anyone would disagree with that. And I've wondered, I love my beer, I don't care what kind it is, to have a nice carbonation. And I wonder if that's not kind of speaks to my enjoyment of drier styles of beer, Pilsner, stuff like that. I don't know, but I do think it's interesting, and I absolutely do plan to play around with brewing some Brut IPA, hopefully sooner than later. I just got to get my hands on some enzyme.
Yeah, you can find it pretty much all over the place. I'm gonna try and do the same thing too. And one thing I think you might also be able to do is try to use some enzyme both in the mash as well as the fermenter, just to see how dry we can get it. And then, do a little more champagne conditioning to bump up that carbonation and have something really ready for February.
Awesome, man. Well, that is all the time we've got for this episode. Brian, I feel like we've said enough. Is there anything else you'd like to leave our listeners with?
I have about 30 enzyme jokes that are totally not appropriate for this show. I highly recommend anybody that has a biochemistry anything to just go online and look them up. They are amazing.
Yeah, well, I know that you've probably never made an enzyme. To read more about the experiments that we talked about and all other stuff that we're up to, you can head over to Brülosophy.com. The Brülosophy Podcast is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors, as well as all of our rad listeners. We seriously could not do this without you. Cheers to everyone who has subscribed and left a review of our show. It makes a huge difference. If you haven't yet, please consider doing so. Head over to Brülosophy.com/support to view a list of ways you can easily help us to continue producing this podcast. If you want a reward for your support, visit Patreon.com/Brülosophy. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Brülosophy Podcast. Until then, think beer.
Start off the morning with some hot tea, lemon and honey, cause it suits my bro. Put some herb in the bowl, yeah, it's homegrown. Ain't gotta go through the middleman no more. Life is good, the likelihood of me. Looking for a new career? Welcome to Do HVAC Training Service Center in North Charleston. Enroll today in our comprehensive HVAC training hands-on field experience-based program, covering troubleshooting, maintenance, installation, and more on various HVAC systems and ductwork. We offer EPA and NAEP preparation and testing, along with various certifications. Enjoy payment options. Achieve certification in under 5 months. Enroll now for your new journey of skill development and career advancement. Log on to DEWHVACTrainingsc.com to inquire.